I think we are live. Hey Dreamer, all right, looks like I am live, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. So welcome, viewers. This is a live demo of my upcoming software, Midinous. It will be releasing on September 28th on Steam. Initially, it will be released for Windows. It will be out for other operating systems eventually. That is currently in development, so be on the lookout for that. Today I want to just go over the main features. I know when Ben Jordan demoed the software, there were a lot of questions about how the software was going to work and what kind of things you can do with it. So we've got Midinous. I'm running Propellerhead Reason in the background here. Actually, it's Reason Studios Reason now. And I've got my modular. So there's a bit of a delay on the video for the modular, so the sound might not line up with the video, but I might build a patch and pipe some stuff from Midinous into it and see what happens. So to start, this is your main Midinous interface. You'll see the performance controls up at the top. You've got control over tempo. You can use a tap tempo. There's a scale and key feature that I'll go over in a bit, and the grid and beat subdivisions. So just real quick, the grid layout is, so each tile is a quarter note, but you can subdivide that further by this function here. So currently it's a quarter note, but you can go half note, eighth, 16th, all the way up to 64. And that essentially affects the way that the sequence propagates. So I'm going to go switch over to the place tool, and you'll see a little green reticle here. I'm just going to place a few points. The first point you ever place is always going to be a start point. Now a start point is required to start a sequence. So I've got a start point here. I just placed this one here. I'm just going to make a little simple circuit here. These aren't linked currently, so I'm going to push 3 and go into the path tool. And I'm just going to link these up. And you'll notice a little blue line. That means they are linked. So the keyboard shortcuts I'm using are all remappable, and we can go over that as well. The whole interface is completely recolorable, including the background, including the points that you can place. We're just going to go over pretty much everything that anyone has a question on today. So I've got a start point here. I've got 3 more points linked up. If we click on one, it will show the point properties menu here. You can see that the note is 60, or C4, the 4th octave of C. Velocity set at 100 out of 127. Channel, MIDI channels 1. Duration is 1 quarter note. The duration is specifically related to the size of a tile. So if you were to set the duration to 1 here, but you were to change this subdivision to 8 instead of 4, then each duration value will be 1/8 note instead of a quarter note. So that's how that works. So we've got a circuit here, and if we push play or press spacebar, also remappable, you'll start to see something propagating. In fact, you might hear Reason. Yeah, so right now you can hear Reason. It's a simple sine tone. Midinous does generate its own sounds, so I'm going to stop this. I'm going to disable the sound in Reason, and I'm going to turn on the internal synth of Midinous, and you'll hear simple tones. So Midinous is generating its own sound right now, but all it does is simple sine waves. It really works well with MIDI. I mean, that's basically its #1 function. So the program is sending out MIDI data right now. And so if there's nothing accepting the MIDI, or if whatever you're sending it to is muted, you won't hear any sound, which is expected. It's just sending data. So we'll turn it back on in Reason, and we can hear a simple sawtooth wave coming from one of the devices in Reason. And you'll notice there's what's called a traveler that's traveling along the path, sort of letting you know when the next note is going to trigger. So all right, we got a simple circuit. That's great. I forgot to mention you can zoom in and out. So I'll zoom in on this to make it a little easier to see. And so where Midinous sort of shines is that each of these objects, these points, are configurable. Like I was saying earlier, note, velocity, even channel, and duration, repeat is how many times it will repeat its function after it completes. And so we will just click on this point here, and they're all movable, by the way. But just to start out, we have a simple sequence. So I'm going to set this note to 65. That'll be an F. And clearly we see it's F. Now this sequence is not very interesting, but I want to make sure that people get the gist of the features, starting from the very base. And please feel free to comment if you have questions about any of this, and I'll try to get to them. So what we're going to do is make a little bit more of a complex sequence. Now, you can go one-to-one here. Hey, Christopher Floyd. He asks, this looks pretty fun. How long have you been working on it? I started with a Ruby, the language, programming language, Ruby version, way back in not way back, I guess. It was 2019 when I made the prototype for Midinous. And that's open source, that's free. If anyone wants to try to get it running, you're more than welcome to look at my GitHub and try to get that running. But I think this is the much more superior version. And when this releases, there will be a free demo for people to try before they buy. And so since 2019, I decided it wasn't very user-friendly. I wanted to rewrite it in something that's more accessible. So I chose .NET, C#. I picked a game framework, monogame, and I wrote this program. So everything you see is written in a game framework in C#/.NET. I hear you. 2019 feels like just complete eons, like you said. Yeah, it's been a while, but this is pandemic code. So maybe it's not the cleanest, but it does work, and it is, I think, pretty performant. So this simple sequence, you can go one way, but you can also create paths back in the same direction. And you'll notice the type of the point changed. Instead of just being blank, it's now got this graphic on it. This graphic means that it's going to do round-robin sequences. So if we send a traveler along this path, you'll notice that it doubles back once it reaches that point again. To make this easier to see, you can see that there's now two paths running along this vector here. So a traveler comes out, it hits this point, but the first traveler's direction is going to go down, so it hits this point first. Next time it goes around, though, it doubles back. And this order is configurable via the travel order menu here. So if we select one of these, we'll see the path light up. So that's first in line, that's going to go travel there first. We can move that down, and so now the first traveler is going to go back on itself. And if we play, we'll see that here. So now we can actually double up all of these. So now we have an even more complex sequence with just 4 points. Now we'll take one of these and we'll change the note a bit. And we can just start experimenting. So I moved this to the centerpiece, the center place of this whole sequence, but it's going to sound the same because the distance between these is still the same. So graphically, if you're using any kind of graph theory, it's the same distance, but it just looks different. And we can make this even more complicated by removing this point, making this a start point, and linking this point over here, this point over here. So we'll have double length between some, I'm going to move these closer together so that they sound off a little bit more quickly. So far, we've only done modifications on note, but we can also do modifications on velocity. So I'm going to switch over to Reason real quick and make sure that I've got this synth configured so that the velocity affects the amplitude. So I'm just going to pump this all the way up. And we can test this real quick. I'm just going to draw some notes in Reason, affect their velocity. That seems to be working. All right, so now we have velocity affecting the volume of the notes. That's good. We'll switch back over to Midinous. Hey, Motoko, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm actually going to go more into the UI in a bit. I just want to go over some basic things about how Midinous works and how the signals propagate, but then I'll show you more about the user interface and how it's configurable. The window's draggable as well. I just have it set to 1920 1080, so it looks nicer on stream. All right, so we've got 3 points. We've got them triggering each other. You can sample play by one of the keyboard commands. So I'm going to push this up. You can also live edit as well. That sounds good. So like I was saying, we can modify the velocity of these too. So let's kick this velocity down to 60 and we'll hear it be a little quieter. This is only because I configured the velocity in my synth to react to the velocity differently than it used to. I'm going to kick this volume up just a little bit. There we go. We can also make this one higher. Doesn't sound very interesting. I'm going to switch over to Reason and just load up a patch that I've created before. Let's get something from Blamsoft. Yeah, that sounds nice. So I'm going to go up here to the Advanced MIDI control, and instead of my subtractor, I'm going to switch it over to the Expanse synthesizer. Boost the volume a bit, and let's see what that sounds like. That's certainly more interesting than a sine wave. Now let's make sure that the velocity affects the amplitude or something. I mean, velocity can affect anything on this thing. Let's just go amp. All right. Nice. Actually, while it's playing, I'll show you a bit of the live editing. You can place points and link them up while it's running. Right. Now we can make it even more interesting. Something I haven't touched on, and one of the most powerful aspects of Midinous is something called the relative changes that it can do. It can have relative changes on something like note, velocity, channel, duration, and the repeat function. Actually, we'll take a quick detour, and I want to talk about the repeat real quick. So repeat works by just repeating the function of whatever this whatever the note that has the repeat on it has done. So if we push play here, it's just a simple note and it's done. If we set the repeat to 1, it'll repeat its function 1 time. So it had a note of 60, velocity 100, channel 1, duration 1, and repeat 1, which means the repeat's going to repeat all of these once. We can set that up to 6, and it'll repeat it 6 times. We can set duration to 3, and it will repeat it 6 times with duration of 3. So now that we know what repeat is, we'll go back over here to our main sequence. We'll set this one to start again. And we can set relative changes on, let's say, note. So if I set this to +1, or it's just +1, if I set it to 1, the traveler is going to carry the data from the previous point. It's going to hit this one, and then the note that played is going to be 1 semitone higher than the one that came before. So let's see that in action. So you'll hear there's 1 semitone that's different. And it's called relative because it borrows the data that was just played to affect the data that plays from the point with relative values. If we pushed it up to 2 or 3, and this can affect velocity as well. Let's push the velocity up to 50. We can do duration as well. Let's make it a little longer. Let's make it a little longer so we can actually hear it. Nice. And if I move this here, it's going to sound the same. Because as we were saying, it's just about the distance. This is the same distance as here. Now, something that relative changes can also do is snap to a scale. There's something here called the document scale, and there's also the document key, which can be set to any one of the 12 semitones that is available, and any of these scales. Someone had mentioned in the previous stream that they'd like to see user scales, and that might be a thing in the future, but for now, there's several predefined scales, anywhere from major and minor to half diminished and even 2 semitone tritone. So if we set this to pentatonic minor, for example, now this +3 will be +3 on that minor pentatonic minor scale. So all the intervals that it's going to go through isn't going to be snapped to chromatic anymore. It's going to be on the pentatonic minor scale. So let's play it here. And we can change the scale on the fly. I just changed it to pentatonic major. Alright, now that we've got the basis for relative changes, there's another feature on top of relative changes that allow it to work over a range of values. So I'm going to go ahead and mute turn the start off for that. I'll make a little simple sequence over here. We'll set this to start, and it'll play normally. But since we're snapping to pentatonic major, I'd like to make this a little more interesting. So I'm going to select all those points. I'm going to push that up to 3, like in the other sequence, but here I'm going to enable something called range. And what the range will do is pick at random a value between +3 and -3 by default in the pentatonic major scale, for example, as we have chosen pentatonic major. So when we play this now, every time one of these points triggers, it's going to pick between + and -3 on that interval. And it also includes whatever you have set for the note. So in this case, it will play 60, it will play something +3 or -3 on that pentatonic major scale. So we don't even have to connect all of these points in an interesting way to get interesting sequences. This is a simple bar measure, but it sounds more interesting than just a simple note that you specify on a point. And we can turn off going to -3 by clicking this button here. So now it's only going 0 to +3. We can do the same thing in the opposite direction, only descending. And we can keep pushing this up. That's me adjusting the filter cutoff so it's a little bit easier to hear. All right. Now that is the breadth of the basic features of Midinous. Among relative changes are also relative scales and relative roots. If you want one section to play in pentatonic major and one section to play in pentatonic minor, that is possible. Now what I just did there is copy points and paste them. You can also select them, right-click and say copy, and then right-click and say paste. And then you can say right-click and clear copy to clear the clipboard, or Control-B. And these are all configurable. So I'm going to connect these in strange and interesting ways, just basically randomly. Set one as a start point. I'll make sure the other one is as well. I'll push these an octave up. Yeah, I'm going to use the quick play here. All right, so we know that they're an octave apart. I'm going to set this relative scale to pentatonic major, and I'm going to set the document scale to pentatonic minor, and these will use, I'm going to set these to range as well. So they'll go 1, 2, 3 for the relative range. We'll turn on the range, and so those will play with a relative range of 3 in the interval at pentatonic minor, but these will play at a relative range of 3 at pentatonic major. It might not sound pretty, but you'll get the gist. So these sequences independently are playing in different scales. If you wanted to offset this sequence, you could make a point here to just be the source point of the traveler, turn this start point off, and then you have a syncopated sequence. I'm going to disable this relative scale because it doesn't sound very pretty. Very cool. Now, as I mentioned, this program is sending out MIDI data. Now, currently, Reason Studio's Reason is accepting this MIDI data and you're hearing sounds, but it can go pretty much anywhere. It can control hardware even. And so I'm going to demo how you can send this MIDI out of a MIDI port, and in my case, I'm going to send it out of my interface and into my modular. So I'm just going to go ahead and start this. I'm going to start this sequence, and I'm going to turn off the Reason synth so you don't hear it. All right, so the sequence is playing, and if we switch over to my modular, you'll see the light on the MIDI device here lighting up, making it apparent that there's MIDI coming through. Midinous also sends MIDI clock. So if I stop my sequence in Midinous, you'll see those lights stop. I'm going to click Send MIDI Clock in Midinous. Send MIDI Clock here. Switch back to my modular, and if I press play, you'll see the clock lights now light up here. So we're sending clock with Midinous. Midinous can act as a primary device, primary MIDI device, when you're organizing any hardware or software with itself. So I'm going to spend a few minutes and hook up this patch, just a simple, probably something out of plates, and hook it into my mixer, and we'll hear Midinous triggering plates through the MIDI port. So Midinous currently is now controlling a modular synth. Very simple patch, but you get the idea. The MIDI data can be sent anywhere you need it to. I even have a friend who's controlling VJ software with it, controlling lights with just MIDI data. Let's see if I can trigger these at the same time. Oh yeah, they're not tuned correctly, but as you could hear, Reason and my modular were playing in sync. I'm going to turn off clock, and I'm going to switch back to Midinous. And I'm going to just take a brief few minutes and go over the user interface a little bit. So, where to begin? I think the main place I want to focus on right now is the toolbox. So in the toolbox, you have a few options here, and these are your main tools of the entire program. You have your select tool here, which is the tan box you see. You have the place tool, which is right next to it. That allows you to place points. And you have the path tool, which allows you to connect those points via paths. Below that, you have undo and redo, which are both controlled via the mouse and also the keyboard if you want. There's an option to turn on note names. You can see note names at a glance with this option. If a point has relative values enabled, you will see RV instead. There's an option to view channels as well. So if you want this group of points, for example, to be channel 2, then you can set it to channel 2 and you'll see that reflected here. It's a nice way to see how things are being controlled. You can also enable something called path weight, which currently it looks a little cumbersome, but it is essentially telling you the weight of the path. And we'll get into that in a little bit. I've only shown the basic features of points, but we'll get into the more advanced features of points in a few moments. There's an option to quantize selected points if they are not part of the grid. So there is an option called snapping, and if I turn snapping off, I'm able to place points that are not aligned to the grid. And you can connect these just like normal. And if we play it, we can get odd timing. And this allows things that don't really align to your normal... I'm just going to get rid of this stuff. To your normal method of sequencing. Let's just link this back up to the beginning. So as you can hear, this is like almost complete chaos. It doesn't really align to anything, but it allows textures. So I'm just going to have some fun and select all of this and make it a note range of 6. So it's playing pentatonic minor in a weird... Oh wait, it's still triggering my modular. Hang on. Alright, I'm going to turn on Reason again. There we go. Okay. So snapping allows you to, when you turn it off, allows you to get some really strange timings and things that really wouldn't be possible in a normal sequencer. So you could, for example, have this chaotic sequence here, and I'll turn down the velocity a bit. So you could have something there, turn snapping back on, make something that aligns here, and have them play completely together. Now there's a quantize function. If you want to align a set of points that isn't aligned, you can click quantize and it'll snap it. And so now if we play this, everything will be aligned via quarter notes. So snapping is nice. Snapping allows you to get some really weird timings if you turn it off. Along the same lines of connecting points, you can also set the path mode. So right now you see it's very angular, but we can set that to straight, which also is not really aligned to the grid. You can get very odd timings. So if you set that here, connect these points. This doesn't really align to a sequencer, but it has a rhythm anyway. I don't even know what kind of math or rhythm this might create, but you can get some really interesting results. So this is a good time to bring in another function of points, which is making them a random point. Now I'll set that to random with this option here, and you'll see the paths that are going out of the point are purple. Those can also be configured color-wise. So what random does is it will pick any point that it's connected to at random. It will send a traveler there. So this isn't any longer a round-robin sort of selection. It's a random selection. So it's picking at random right now which path it wants to take. Now this is what I was mentioning earlier about path weight. This is where path weight comes in. So we'll select our random point, we'll go to Path Viewer, and we can see our 4 paths exiting here. The nodes on this graph correspond to the nodes on the actual canvas. So we'll select this path by clicking this node and then clicking this path. The path will flash, that's how you know it's selected. And we're going to set this weight to 4. So weight affects the probability, and we'll turn on path weight. Weight affects the probability of which path is going to be chosen. So almost likely the 4 path now is going to be chosen most often than any of the other ones. And we can see that here. It's 4 times more likely to be chosen than any other path. And each path can have its own independent weight. A quick and easy way to select a path is just to select it. And we can set this one to, I don't know, 32. It's almost always probably going to go to 32 now because it's so high. path weight also affects some other things, and I'll show you now a different feature of points. So that's random. We'll turn that off for now. Another point type is divide. Now divide will take every single path that's exiting a point and send a traveler out on it. So we'll choose divide, and you'll notice when I push play after I set this to start, a traveler will go to every single path. So you can actually set up chords this way. So now, all 4 of those points are triggering at the same time, making a polyphonic chord. This might be highly dependent on the device you're sending it to. Obviously, in the case of a modular, you may not have that ability because there's a lot of mono synths in modular. Hey Ben, welcome to the stream. Thank you for tuning in. Now, path weight also affects the number of travelers that go from a point when a point is set to divide. So if we set this to weight 2, then 2 travelers will come out of this side of the point. Now, we don't notice it now, but let's say we had 2 points that this one was connected to. Now this is a round robin. This is a round robin point, but because we're sending 2 travelers to it, it will send out 2 signals, and both this one and this one will trigger after that. So I'm just going to set that so we can hear it. So as you can see, it doesn't look like it, but it did send 2 travelers out because the weight on this path was 2. And so therefore it sent 2 travelers, and because it's round robin, it picked one first and then the other. Now let's say we had 3. Now you can get some alternating interesting sequences this way too. So I'll set that here. I'll have this loop back on itself. We'll turn down the velocity on these. As you can see, it's only picking 2 at a time up here because it's sending 2 travelers out. If we set this to 1, it's only sending 1. You can see that trigger here. If we build on it, we could make this random. So it's going to pick 1 at random. If we set the travelers to 2 on this path, it's going to pick 2 at random. It could be the same one when it's set to random. You can already sort of see how combining these different functions can lead to some really interesting results. Let's see, what's next? Ah, yes. So there's another function of points called portal. Now, portal is a way to jump from one part of a sequence to another instantly. So we'll delete that sequence. We'll get rid of this one too. And let's say I combine these 2, or these 4 points together. I'll set this as a portal point, and the path turns red, also configurable. And we'll notice, I'll set this one a different note. You'll notice when the traveler reaches this portal point, it's going to jump immediately to this point here, and they'll both play at the same time. Also another way to trigger chords. Now the portal points work off of a round robin system as well. So I'm going to live edit and put that there. You'll notice it jumps. So it acts as a round robin point. Well, that's easy. We can set this to divide. And we can set this path weight to 2. And now you have an infinite overflow. But that's easy to fix. I mean, we just take away this. We delete that path, and now there's no return, and we won't get a blow up. But we're still sending 2 travelers along this path so that both of these nodes are triggered at the same time. So let's hear what that sounds like. Expected. You might be asking, what if it blows up? And I can show you that. There is protection for blow-ups in this program, but it is fun to see it happen, so I'm just going to try to break the program right now, and we'll see. So I'm going to set this path weight to 2, so it'll send 2 travelers. They're both set to divide, and so this one's going to create 2, and then this one's going to create 2, and then it's going to keep going back and forth exponentially. Actually, that's not interesting. That's more interesting. It won't take long. In the background, it's creating thousands of travelers, but as you can see here, traveler overflow. It's not very prevalent here because we don't have a lot of complex sequences, but there is protection over that. There's also protection over portals, because as you can imagine, if you set them both to portal, they're just going to instantly blow up. And it tells you that there's recursion, and you can click Show Me. It'll show you where to correct it before playing again. All right, so those are the basic features of points. We'll keep going along the UI. As I was mentioning earlier, you can send MIDI clock with Midinous. There is a MIDI panic button in case anything gets stuck. I haven't personally had an experience with that in my program. I've gone to a lot of great lengths to reduce the amount of stuck notes. If Midinous happens to crash, usually it's not. You're not worried about MIDI panic at that point. But when the program closes, it has some exit features that reduce the MIDI load. And then, of course, there's an internal synth, which people can use for reference. Or if people don't have a DAW, they can use internal synth to just mess around. We'll go into the main menu now. So I just want to show a few of the options. As I was saying earlier, every control in the program is rebindable. I use a Colmac keyboard, so I don't use a QWERTY keyboard layout. So a lot of my canvas controls have been modified to that effect. But you can move the canvas around with normally WASD. You can zoom in with Q and E. But these are all remappable to your style. And even the control command modifier keys are remappable. Like Control N for new can be remapped to Control L, for example. Next on the list is appearance. The entire program can be customized the way you see fit. If you want the background to be white, then you can set it to white. Completely blinding, I wouldn't do it personally, but that is your prerogative. I'm going to actually just reset that because I don't like it. Okay. You can affect the grid line color, you can affect the grid point color, and my favorite feature, honestly, of the UI is being able to recolor it on the fly. So if you want to switch the interface color, if you don't like the blue, if you want red instead, then you can change it to red while the program is running just to see how it works. You have control over things like saturation. I don't know what V means right now, but HSV, RGB is a pretty common way to do it. You can put in your own hex code if you want, but the whole UI is configurable this way. So you can configure the main elements, you can configure the pressed elements, the mouse hover elements, active items, and even the color, the fill color of your new save open, save as, that kind of thing, and even the text boxes. So when the color gets too bright, the text will dynamically change to be darker so that you can see it. And if you hate what you've done and you want to get back to the original, you can just reset defaults, click appearance, click accept, and you're back to normal. There's also startup options. If you commonly work in a certain tempo, a certain route, a certain scale, all of these things can be set on startup. About Midinous takes you to my homepage. Open, save, you can open and save documents, double click them to open or click them and click accept. As you can see, I've been hard at work making many different I mean, I use this in my own composition all the time now. So I've been working quite a bit to make it work for me. And I'm moving the canvas around with WASD right now. Remap to Colmac. So I'm just going to work on a patch. I'm just going to make something crazy. And feel free to ask questions. I'm looking at the chat. And we're just going to have some fun. Actually, what I'll do, when I demoed this for the first time, I had a piano. So I'm just gonna have a piano out, because you can get some really natural sounding real instruments to play, and I think it sounds really awesome. Yes, Dreamer, excellent. Thank you for bringing that up. I would like to sequence some drums with this. In fact, I'm actually gonna load up one of the trailers that I made, because it's a lot easier to demo something that's already been created. Actually, let me see. Drum machine. Yeah, okay, so this is the sequence that I demoed on my Twitter a few weeks ago. This is the one that has different channels for kick, snare, closed hat, open hat, and tom. Oh, I'm sorry, not different channels. If I click channels here, you'll see it's all on channel 1, but because my drum machine has different MIDI values per note, that's how I was able to do that. You can color notes. I didn't show that. Let's do that real quick. If you select a note and click on change, you can change the color just like you change the interface. It's the same controls, and you have free reign to do that as well. And a little fun fact, when a traveler leaves a point that is a certain color, it will borrow the color of that point. Just a fun little thing. Just a happy little thing. All right, so I'm going to mute these bass notes real quick and these ARPs. I'm going to load up something in Reason that I made for this very specific Midinous patch. Give me one moment. And I'll go into how I created this sequence in just a sec. Because yes, there are tips to creating drum sequences that, things like keeping on every bar, like having a downbeat every bar is really important. Unless you're just in total chaos, that's fine too. Let's see if this one has it. I don't think so. Ah, okay. Okay, let me turn this down. Okay, so you can clearly hear drums being triggered by this. You'll notice that the grid beat has been set to 8 instead of 4. That gives me some greater resolution so that I can have things like 16th notes in between. So like, for example, this series of notes is a series of 16th notes instead of 8. Now what I've done here is I've made sure that every loop back that I have is on a downbeat. So if I'll slow it down so we can see it working. Let's zoom in. So you'll notice that every time I loop back on itself, it's going to be coming back to either the center point or a point where it can continue and make a full bar, a full measure of a drum sequence. You don't have to do this, but it's just a tip. And of course, you don't have to do 4/4. You can do 3/4. You really have control over that in Midinous. You don't have to set. You don't have to set a meter. You can just make it. What makes it easier is you'll notice that there's a 4x4 grid of squares here, but that can be changed by using the option here. So that will be your grid measure that you can change on the fly. You can turn it off by just setting it to 0, and you can go all the way up to 32. But that's just a guide for you if you need it. So in this case, it's 4. And you could read this as 4/2 if you wanted to. It is effectively 4/2. I hope that answered your question, Dreamer, about drum sequencing. So we'll kick this back up. And the cool thing about this is I am actually using different channels to control different instruments. So the drums are all on one channel. The ARPs are on channel 2. And I'll unmute these now. And the bass is on channel 3. I'm live editing right now. I just pushed all of those notes up an octave. Let's push it up a fifth. Dreamer, I have no problem showing you how to do it from scratch. That's totally something I can do, and I'll do it now. This is really an info session. Honestly, I'm showing how the program works right before it releases, so perhaps you all can have a head start when it comes out. So, drums are on channel 1, and we can push play here. And we'll just make a simple drum sequence. This does require you to either have all the instruments on different channels. For example, you could have a kick on channel 1, a hat on channel 2, and you could configure them that way. So, you could set this to channel 2, and in your DAW or on your modular, just channel your gates to channel 2. For now, we're going to keep it channel 1 because in Reason, there's a drum machine that makes it pretty easy. Everything's separated by 3 semitones. Let's change the kit. I don't like that. Yeah, I'm just going to make a new project in Reason. Just give me a moment. I'm loading some samples up to mess with. That sounds fine. All right, in Reason, I'm going to channel my MIDI to the Kong. All right, cool. 4 on the floor is boring, obviously, but that's okay. We can switch that. Let's load a hat in. So I'm doing the test play so I can hear what it sounds like. And now I'm just using the plus and minus keys to change the note on the fly. While the sequence is playing and you're modifying the note's values, you won't hear them. But you can still press the test play to hear them. So we'll set this to a snare. 3 basic drum elements, right? No, I don't like that. Let's reduce the decay on that. Okay. Now let's make it a little more interesting by adding a drum, a kick right after the first kick that plays every second measure. With maybe a lower velocity. And we can have this go in a different direction, have a different pattern. This is what I was talking about always ending on the downbeat. Unless you don't care. In a sequence like this, it's only 3 long, but, you know, it's up to you. Let's speed it up a little. Now you can chain up a bunch of these different patterns and just, you can pretty much go wild and combine everything that I've shown earlier. Now when you're dealing with drums, I like to color the points just so that I know which ones are going to be which sound. You can use note names if you know the range that you're going to be working with. But that's why in this other sequence, I had them all colored and I had them labeled. Oh yeah, labels. I didn't show labels. Let's turn off channels. You can add labels to points. For informational purposes, or in my case, the guided tutorial has a bunch of labels to follow. If you don't want a point to make a sound, you can mute it. So what I usually do in some of the tutorials is I'll put a point down, I'll mute it, I'll change its color to something, you know, vaguely tan, and then I'll put, you know, a message here. And it's just sort of a way to be like, oh, okay, well, this is a drum sequence, so I'm going to put this here and say drum sequence. So if you're anywhere else in the program, you're looking around at your sequence, you see, okay, this is drums. Got it. Just an easy organizational tool. What else to show? What else to show? Agreed. Yeah, coloring is very useful for drums. I'm going to load up that example before and just walk through it. And then there's one more thing I want to show. Let's see. Drum machine. Okay. So essentially with this, I've strung up a bunch of these patterns. Dog Sander wants to see my wildest patch. Yeah, absolutely I can show that. I have actually a bunch of them. I'll just go through them if you want me to. Yeah, I can do that. Absolutely. Okay. Let's see. You know, Ben actually made a few patches himself and he put them on here. But I will show... Let's see. There's actually the demo site project, which is what you can see on the website if you go there. It doesn't sound like anything, but I just recorded the visuals from it. You know, with some of these really simple sequences, honestly, they can sound the most complex. So for these, I'm just going to delete that drum machine and Reason. I'm going to get myself... I'm just going to close this project. Let's pop over to Reason so you can see what I'm doing. So I am just going to drag out a piano device. Okay. Slap some good old vintage verb on it. That's a little much. Okay. It is indeed piano time. Let's change the mic to ambience. Floor mic. Give a subdued feel. I'm going to channel the MIDI into the piano. And let's see. It's pretty quiet. So I have two starting points. I've snapped these scales to Locrian, and it's picking a range of notes. It's randomizing velocity to give you the natural feel, and the duration's also being modified. So some of these points you'll see end quickly, others linger a little bit. And even with just 5 points, connecting them like this, you can get some very, very pretty and natural sounds. Really, the randomization of the velocity, I think, is super powerful. Let's add some points that aren't snapped here. So what I'll do with this, I'll quantize this point here. Make sure that it's snapped. And I'll set this as a divide point. So it can split off and trigger these points up here, but it can return to the normal sequence. Sounds kind of weird right now, but If we have the velocity decrease by, let's say, 13, and the note to +1, set the scale to Locrian. Let's set this to 1 octave above. So now this is triggering and it's sort of off kilter, but it sort of plays with everything else because everything else is in tune. So Dreamer, yes, the sustain works with the duration, the duration property. Now, for these notes here, I'm randomizing the duration between +2 and -2 quarter notes, basically. So the duration on all of these is 4, so 4 quarter notes. But I'm randomizing the duration to either be 6 or down as low as 2. And so some will hold, others will be short-lived. And you can see the time left on points by the little clock icon on each. If I didn't want this to trigger so often, I would probably just put another point here. I'll mute this one so it doesn't play. I'll send this out that way. I'll make this a random point. I'd hook that one to there. I'd delete the path from that. And now I've got reign over how often I want this to play. All I have to do is modify the probability that this is going to go that way. So if I set that to wait 2, I'll only sometimes get this sequence to play. So it will only sometimes play. And I could also affect these notes in a range fashion instead. We'll color these to make them let people know that it's doing something different. If we set all these to straight points, they'll take the shortest path to get to their neighbor. So that's a little chaotic, but we can kick down the base velocity to affect that. And if we wanted to change the entire scale on the fly, we have access to that. Let's say we wanted to go, we can just disable the scale. It sounds like ass, but let's affect this. Let's just switch to Aeolian. Or Dorian. Or harmonic minor. I could sit here and listen to this all day. There's something else that you can do with Midinous that I haven't shown yet. Well, I kind of have shown it, but you can sort of create these visuals that might represent music, or you could just make them a visual to maybe a music video or something you're making. So let's open Wave Reflect, which is going to be included in the in all copies of Midinous. This file is going to be included. And so what we've learned so far, from what we've learned so far, we know that this is a divide point. If we click on it, we see everything that it's going to go to. So it's going to send a traveler out on every single one of these paths. And then they're going to return. And then they're going to get sent out again. And then they're going to return. This is a termination point. Nothing leaves this point. Otherwise, it would blow up. But you'll see over here, this point is the only point that's going to return to the one that sends out the wave. And you'll see that happen when we press play here. And it's going to sound weird because I still have it connected to Reason, but I think this is a good example of how to create visuals. So right now it's just creating a wave of MIDI data, basically. There might be some math in here I don't understand about how it's being reflected and what it looks like. I just think it looks cool. I guess if we wanted total chaos, we could actually select these and pick a range of notes. Oh boy. Let's tune it. Ooh. Hang on, it's clipping. There we go. Some weird, like, Phil Glass vibes in this now. How about pentatonic minor? Let's increase the range. Still clipping. Oh boy. Well, anyway, you get the idea. And that will just go forever. Because it's a circuit, it'll never stop unless you push stop. Or you live edit it in such a way that it blows up. Also possible. I have one called Random Test in here. It's sort of a good explanation of how random works. All of these are set as random points. They've got 2 points coming out, 2 paths coming out of each one. And if you click on path weight, they're all 1, but this sort of exists as a way to explore and see. You'll notice that this one is 2. That means this one's going to get hit more often than the others. And this is a divide point. It's sending a signal to every single one of these middle random points. So you can see there's basically an even distribution because it's random. Over time, you'll just see an even distribution. Yes, velocity is also being affected. Or can be affected. You can affect it via the relative changes, or you can change the velocity via the point properties. Now, back in the Ruby version, I made a small piano piece. And I'd like to play that just for a bit. Unfortunately, it blows up after a while, but it does sound nice for a bit. And so I'm just going to play that for you. Nothing's relative in this. It's all just raw MIDI data on the points. Everything has a note name. Nothing is randomly generated. But this kind of shows how you can make compositions even in Midinous without using any of the random qualities or the relative changes. Let me make sure my levels are good. Too fast. You'll notice this point split. This is how it will blow up eventually. So Dog Sanders says, is there export-import of the patch data with JSON? Yes. All of the save files in this program are generated and saved as JSON. They're completely portable. All of the settings files, your appearance, your bindings, and otherwise, are also saved via JSON and extremely portable. With Steam, you get cloud saves. All of that is saved automatically. Your settings should carry over from computer to computer, and your saves should as well. Yeah, it's starting to get a little chaotic now. So theoretically, if someone wanted to write a program to, let's sort of a mod maybe, to generate Midinous patches, they could. They can just look at the layout of each .noose file, they're saved as .noose, and just generate a patch from it. Totally could do that. Yes, it will be version 1 on the 28th. I'm getting very close. I'm making improvements every day. Fixed a few bugs today even, right before the stream. I added this range function just earlier, where you could go up or down or both. Before it was only one, both up and down. I made some interesting decision tree stuff as well. So this is just a random decision tree. It sends out a few MIDI signals and they just propagate. It's sort of like a, what is that called? Kurchenko? I forget what it's called. I just know the Red Letter Media version. I don't know the actual game. But let's see. So it's deciding which way to go. And you end up at chords. And there is a normal distribution here, so most of the chords I have centered around this. Plinko, thank you. You could technically adjust the pathway to affect the normal distribution. But you can make decision trees. I am going to wrap up soon. I will stick around for any Q&A that you have before we end the stream. Thank you so much. This is a serious passion project of mine. I can't wait to support it and see what users create. It will be available only on Windows from the start. I am developing for Linux and Mac simultaneously. I just need to get those systems to be able to develop for them. But once that's done, I will be releasing Mac and Linux versions as well. And if anyone wants to see anything, I will demo it. You are viewing the full version of the program. Can I say the price yet? I could technically. It will be much less than any VST you know. This isn't a VST, but it will be much less than any VST you could probably think of that would do the same thing. It's certainly going to be less than a AAA video game. I would price it along the same lines as an indie developer's video game. I'll say that much. And at launch, there will be a 10% discount for the first week. And like I said before, there will be a free demo so that you can try before you buy. Planned features, good question. I would like to add, and this is a pretty major feature, but I would like to add logic objects so that these signals that travel can be added and subtracted, and that's added. Delays, terminators, so that if you have like 1,000 travelers coming into a point, they get terminated, or limiters. You know, I want to add all this stuff. And the framework is there. You just have canvas objects, you can send signals to them, you've got logic. So that's a major feature. I want to really do that. So yeah, Raven, in terms of complex patches, I've shown most of them. Really, the thing is, you can get a lot of complexity out of a few number of points. Chaos cluster is good. Where's that? Here it is. Yeah, so this one is an off-the-grid cluster of points on a channel. I'll make them channel 1. And they're all randomly connected. They're all pretty much going after each other. Yes, Grant. I want those logic objects, I want them to be able to affect other points' properties. I think that'd be wild. The only thing I'm trying to do is avoid feature creep. So right now, the program is not very complex from a UI perspective. And the trick is adding that functionality without making the program cumbersome. So one of the main things I'm working on with this is to make it super user-friendly and really approachable for pretty much anybody. It feels like a level editor, but you're creating music with it. And I think that's really something cool. And Alan, CC values, definitely. I think there may in the future be an option to either have notes or CC as MIDI data that's triggered by this. Because then that will allow you to have modulation in other places. I think that's great. I think that's an awesome thing to do. Doesn't work with piano. Let's pick something else. Let's go back with that Blamsoft device. Yes, the UI is built with a framework called Myra. It is a free and open source library. And it's expandable. So if I wanted to add an option, for example, for you to have something like, I don't know, round edges instead of chamfered edges, you could do that very quickly via Myra. Is it possible to control the parameters of Midinous objects with MIDI, Grant says. Yeah, that's a future thing. In the Ruby version, you're able to control the points with a controller, MIDI controller. Let's say you pushed middle C on the MIDI controller, whatever points were selected, it would set them to middle C. I do want that functionality in Midinous. It's just going to take a few more iterations, maybe, and to get those devices to work. It's making the device selection intuitive. But as it stands, Midinous acts as its own MIDI device. You don't need third-party software to channel the MIDI. It's basically a controller emulator. So, someone asked, how do you draw the shapes? Do you mean how are they drawn on the screen, or how do you put them on the screen? If you want to put them on the screen, you go to the Place tool, and you can place them like this. And similarly, if you want to connect them together, you use the Path tool. I like that idea, Grant. I like being able to change in real time. Yeah, almost using it as a performance sequencer. I think that would be really cool. I am not using Monogame Extended for this. This is pure Monogame. I looked into Monogame Extended initially because I was looking for UI. But Myra has pretty much everything I needed and is very extensible, so I wrote this completely in C#, using libraries for audio and some MIDI libraries and things like that. And I think that's sort of kept it lightweight and extensible. I could listen to this for a very long time. Sometimes I get lost, just looking at my own sequences. Future feature request. Auto rearrangement of points that keep the same equivalent graph but let you visualize it differently. I'm not sure what you mean. Auto rearrangement of points. So, Alan, you're talking about a feature that does that automatically? Finds a place where it would be the same distance between all of its points? That would be probably a little unnecessary if I have to be honest with you. You can move points in real time and they'd sound the same if they were the same distance. But trying to find the same distance between all selected points would be kind of cumbersome and not really worth the effort, in my opinion. just really like this one. This is so simple, 5 points, and it just sounds great. Train Misser, thank you. So be on the lookout for Midinous on Steam, initially for Windows, other environments in the future, on September 28th. There is a demo you can try before you buy. I'm going to go ahead and let this play for a while. I'll still interact if there are some questions, but I am going to end the stream here in a few minutes. Train Misser, it has the ability for MIDI in. It is not implemented yet. But all development is parallel with MIDI in and out. You can plug this into Ableton, yes. It acts as a virtual MIDI controller. So what you'd open Midinous and you'd open Ableton and you'd see, for your imports, you'd see Midinous port there. And you can select it. Thank you. Thank you very much for your support. Raven, I like that idea. So you're saying select a group of points and maybe click like a auto color button that colors them automatically based on the MIDI note? I just want to make sure I get that right. That sounds like a great idea. Now, when this releases on Steam, there will be discussion boards. I will probably have a sticky there for a suggestion box. And any of these ideas, I am absolutely willing. There's also a Discord channel if you'd like to join and keep up to date with what's going on with Midinous. Thank you, Train Misser. Thank you very much. It is like modular. Perhaps not inspired by modular. I think I started developing this before I discovered modular. But it plays like a game, and that's exactly what I'm aiming for. Thank you everyone for tuning in. I'll be ending the stream soon. You can't open multiple instances just because of the way Steam works, but it's not impossible. There may be a time where this is on another platform like GOG. Or even Splice, something like that. Multiplayer, maybe. I think latency would be a problem in a music software like this. If you have any other questions before the software releases, please let me know on my Discord channel. Thank you everyone for joining again. Feel free to skim back if you missed parts. You are able to use this video as a VOD or training session if you want. This will always be up on my channel.